the best yo-yo. You want to know what it is. Everyone wants to know what it is. I already know what it is. It's a difficult question, but I do think that there's an answer. And I've got that answer right here. But before I spoil all that and give you my take, let's take a little walk through the history of the best yo-yo so you can really understand how we got here and what it means. Hey, I'm Steven Nedorosik, but you can call me The Bird, and this is a quest to solve what is the best yo-yo. So, to begin, we have to go pretty deep into the history. In the ancient Philippines, the yo-yo was actually used as a weapon. I'm just messing with you, it's not even true. We don't have to go back nearly that far. The furthest back it's probably worth actually going are the Tom Kuhn Silver Bullet and Silver Bullet 2, which are sort of the earliest examples of machined metal yo-yos and yo-yos using ball bearings to spin longer. I think there may have been some experiments with those ideas before this, but this is sort of the first relevant, documented example that matters to the community. And then from there, a lot of the early Omega yo-yos definitely made a mark. You got your Fireball, Raider, Brain, definitely got a lot of people into it, definitely were better than the fixed axles available on the market before that, but I don't think we really see a consensus, objective best yo-yo until we get into the yo-yo boom of the late 90s. I couldn't find an exact date for this, but somewhere in probably 1997, Super Yo released the Renegade, and it was a huge hit with everyone who takes this silly little toy seriously. You can see this in a lot of the classic videos from that era, where legends like Paul Escolar are tossing that thing around and debuting iconic tricks. If you were to believe the packaging, what made the Renegade special was its 3-in-1 design. The halves were reversible, so you could play it as an Imperial, a butterfly, or the very rare pagoda shape, which is named after this sort of building. Very interesting, not so effective for playing some Yoy. What actually made the Renegade so special was a couple of things. The first would be that underneath the plastic there are huge metal weight rings, which just make the yo-yo a lot more powerful and long spinning than you would expect for a $20 plastic yo-yo at this point in time. But the second thing, probably the more important thing, is that it used a starburst response system, which tended to wear down over time and become less responsive. This also meant there was less friction in the gap and it spun even longer, and this actually led to the development of unresponsive tricks and bind returns, which, if you know anything about modern yo-yoing, is a really big deal, because at this point unresponsive is pretty much the entire thing. I'm so sorry to all the 2A players. I think you know what I'm trying to say here though. But the Renegade's reign came to an abrupt end in 2001 when Duncan released the freehand one. Thank you, Steve Brown. Now, did this thing take over because it shipped with a counterweight and introduced the masses to 5A? No, not quite. The truth is that this was just the best yo-yo available at that point by a pretty significant margin. It was a little bit bigger, a little bit wider than really anything else available on the market, and it just felt and played so nice. In fact, these things play so nice that they keep on coming back. We can't get rid of them. But most importantly, the freehand introduced friction stickers as a response system. These would wear out like the starbursts on a Renegade and become less responsive over time, but these also sort of opened the gates to modifying a yo-yo to make it play better. All the cool kids had recessed freehands, where a lathe was used to make a hole in the plastic so the pads could sit flush with the walls of the yo-yo. This made it less responsive with a wider gap, so you could do longer, harder, and more impressive tricks. And there is a direct line from the recessed freehand mod to the silicone pads that are the industry standard now. I'm not sure if I'm really selling to you just how influential this yo-yo was. I'm not sure if the words exist. This thing dominated competition and the culture. Jason Lee won US Nationals 2001 on one of these. Yuki Spencer won Worlds 2002. It's the biggest contests and the biggest names. The freehand was everywhere and it was yo-yoing for this moment in time. But just as quickly as it appeared, the freehand vanished from the world when Duncan's mold to make them actually broke. But thankfully since then it's been reproduced in 1,000 forms, from the older freehand zeros and hyper freehands to the more modern reproductions like this one that I have. But just to put into perspective how important this yo-yo was to the culture, you need to understand that after releasing in 2001, Tyler Severance took home the 5A world title in 2007 on a freehand zero. That is how beloved the original freehand design was. That is the kind of longevity, that is the kind of devotion the culture had toward this design. But that doesn't mean that the freehand was the best yo-yo for that entire time. You see, in 2003, JD won Worlds on a little prototype called the Hitman. This bad boy right here would immediately propel Yo-Yo Gym into being the uncontested dominant brand in competitive yo-yo. Huge metal weight rings, an O-ring response system that didn't need to be replaced, an adjustable gap that you could make wider for less response, and a massive C-sized bearing. It all just put this yo-yo on a completely different level from anything else you could get at the time. It's a little bit smaller in diameter than anything we've talked about so far, but it's also wider, and I think it really represents the direction 1A was heading at this point in time, and really just how far yo-yoing had come in just a few short years. The Hitman might not have quite the list of titles that the Freehand does behind it, but when this thing came out, it was inarguably the best yo-yo on the market. It was not close. The Hitman really gave us the blueprint that Yo-Yo Jam would follow for the next few years, and yo-yos like the Dark Magic and Speeder are more or less side grades to the Hitman, and both of those have plenty of national and world titles as late as 2008. So here's something a little bit wild. Every single yo-yo we've talked about so far actually came responsive out of the box. If you wanted professional performance, you had to put some work in, whether that's cleaning the bearing, modifying the plastic, or just breaking the thing in. But the Yo-Yo Factory 888, this thing came ready to win worlds right out of the box. Maybe you could say the G5 introduced this level of performance first, but the 888 is really what made the impact.
Because it gave us hub stacks, which are now what is completely based around. I can't even say it with a straight face.
Okay, but seriously, up to this point, metal yo-yos were actually kind of a novelty item. But after the 888, after Yuki Spencer won Worlds on the 888, it was very clear that metal was here to stay. This design just did a really good job using the advantages that metal has as a material for a yo-yo. You can just get a better weight distribution and lower friction than is possible with plastic, really. I really don't think I can understate just how much this thing changed the game. I love the Hitman to death. This is one of my favorite yo-yos of all time. But the way this played out of the box just put it in another dimension entirely. I'm sure that today you expect a yo-yo to play that nice out of the box, but in 2007, it didn't happen. There was nothing like opening one of these up and experiencing that for the first time. And on top of the whole metal thing, this yo-yo pretty much introduced the current standard of silicone pad response, which is really a huge deal, and you don't appreciate it until you're playing on something that just refuses to give you a smooth, tight bind like you get on a modern yo-yo. The 888 really was such a game changer. Honestly, I think you could argue it was the biggest game changer out of any of these, because yo-yos really haven't changed that much since the 888's release. You could say that there's one more missing link to get to the present, maybe like a Superstar or Genesis to cross the bridge to a more stable, full-size performance yo-yo. And maybe if I wasn't an uncultured American, I'd give that credit to the Yo-Yo Rex Sleipnir. These are all definitely yo-yos that stood out amongst their peers and have no shortage of national, international, and world titles supporting them. But in my mind, they're all really refinements of what the 888 already did. You're just kind of making it a little bigger, moving around some weight to make the thing more stable. It doesn't change the game quite the same way. If I had to say that there was one more best yo-yo for the time, I think it'd have to be the Yo-Yo Recreation Dropnir, released in 2013. I think a lot of the bimetal designs even today have some lineage back to the Dropnir, but I don't really feel like this yo-yo fits into the same bucket as the ones that I talked about before, because it's not really like bimetals completely took over the game. It's not really like the Dropnir ever became an omnipresent yo-yo that every successful player was using. I think part of it is also just that it's more of a preference thing than a strict upgrade that changes how we think about yo-yo design. Even this year, we have a player like Justin Dower winning US Nationals on a mono metal, and I don't think he was held back by that choice at all. So in my mind, the Dropnir is more of a side grade than a strict improvement that changes how we think about yo-yo design. Dropnir just fits in this weird middle ground. And then I guess there's also this new trend of extremely wide competition yo-yos, mostly bimetals, that deserves a mention too. I'm honestly not entirely sure exactly what started this trend. To my knowledge, C3 was actually the first company to push the boundaries like this, with yo-yos like the Remastered Galaxy, Galaxy Diver, and Vanitas. But I'm pretty sure it word was first brought to my attention by Brandon Vu and Jeff Pang, who did make a video about it, so it's possible the whole thing trickled down from the Outlier Plus. And I've also heard some people give credit to some of Wild's designs. But to me, this kinda just feels like a natural progression of yo-yos. You may have noticed with the models that I focused on that yo-yos were kind of getting progressively wider over time. But then for a while, probably like 2008 to 2016, competition metal yo-yos tended to be right around 42 millimeters wide. There were a few early pioneers like Chen Jialin and John Chow who realized just how much more consistent they could be on stage with a super wide yo-yo, like the Monster or the super wide, but these things didn't really catch on until years later. I think the large-scale transition toward wider yo-yos didn't really happen until around the time that one kid went on a crazy win streak with the Caribou Lodge Manatee. What was that guy's name? I can never remember this. Comment down below if you know who I'm talking about. Regardless of what actually caused the shift, in around 2018 it seemed like the standard width for a competition yo-yo became around 47 to 48 millimeters instead. And now, 6 or 7 years later, yo-yos like the Outlier Plus, some of those wild designs, and so many other cool releases from so many companies are finally starting to push past that 50 millimeter barrier. Like with all the post-888 yo-yos I was talking about, it just doesn't feel like there was one specific design you can point to that changed everything and made this shift happen. Right now, there are so many fun new brands, talented players, and smart creative designers that it just feels to me like there isn't any one yo-yo design that captivates the whole community anymore. And that's actually a beautiful thing. Right now, yo-yo design is somewhat solved. Basically anything by any decently trustworthy brand is gonna play pretty excellent. And that's what makes finding the best yo-yo today so great. You're not looking for the best yo-yo. You're looking for your best yo-yo. In the year 2001, if the freehand just felt too big in your palm, or you didn't like the feeling of something with caps, you were just kinda suffering. But today, if you want undersized, oversized, aluminum, titanium, capped, hub stacked, there's options for all that, and they're all actually good, which might sound obvious and normal, but there is a time when you could really get burned buying an expensive metal yo-yo. I know I ended up with a couple that came with spacers that just didn't work right, or cut strings like nobody's business, or just played way below expectations. So what makes something your best yo-yo? Honestly, I think that's best answered to yourself by getting involved with the community. What company's branding speaks to you? What player's personality or style tickles your brain? It might not always seem like it, but the yo-yo community is tiny, and when you make a purchase, you're voting with your dollar. Not just for which brands will continue to exist, but also for who has influence and standing in the community. Supporting people who you think make the space better to be a part of really does go a long way. And on the other side, not supporting bad actors can really make a difference too. Using myself as an example, the last 2 yo-yos I bought were to support 2 of my current favorite players, who I would also consider to be friends of mine. These also both happen to be made by companies run by yo-yo legends who I've looked up to for years, and I think have done pretty well staying out of controversy. But I did promise you an answer, and I was not lying to get you to watch to the end. For me, the best yo-yo is the Caribou Lodge Swan. This is my signature yo-yo, and I wanted to make an undersized design that used the bimetal weight distribution to still get full-size performance. And I think we knocked it out of the park with this. It's exactly what I wanted, and ever since I got the final version back, I have not tried anything that I like nearly as much. You definitely don't have anything in your collection already that plays like this. It's my best yo-yo for sure, and maybe it'll be yours too. Plus, it's the only yo-yo you can buy that supports the channel, and if you watched all the way to the end, that has to mean something to you. And if you really need to know what the greatest yo-yo of all time is, it has to be either the original freehand or the original 888. What's more valuable? Absolute omnipresence and longevity in the community, or truly setting the modern standard? You can decide that for yourself, but the fact of the matter is that there's a ton of stuff on the market now that just objectively outperforms both of these. Anyway, thank you for watching. Check out one of these videos if you want to know more about some of the famous routines I talked about in this video. I've got to go play with my favorite yo-yos, so for now, I've got to fly.